Defense Secretary Casper Weinberger, one of America's great heroes, and we're so proud to have him on the cutting edge today.
Thank you.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Very nice of you to ask me.
One of the things that what the cutting edge does is find out things that not everybody gets to know. And there's been a question for years about how you set the standard for defense press conferences, and that one happened about 20 some years ago when American people were treated to your first press conference with George Shultz, and it was a spectacular event. We had just bombed Libya, and the press was out for your hide. They wanted to show that all of those airplanes of ours were shot down. Can you tell us just a brief story about how all that happened?
Well, the raid on Libya was conducted because we had always said that when we had absolute proof of who had committed terrorist acts, we would respond as vigorously as we could. And we got absolute proof that the Libyans were behind the bombing of the Berlin discotheque and killed American servicemen and civilians, and we responded. And we had a very substantial raid mounted. There were about 100 planes in the air in that raid, which for peacetime, so to speak, period, was very large. We brought them from England, where the planes were committed to NATO and to the defense of Great Britain. And we wanted to bring them directly across to France, right to Libya. France refused us permission to do that. The British, on the other hand, said, of course, we were welcome to use the planes for that kind of a good purpose. France's refusal meant that we had to fly, pilots had to fly an additional 1,800 miles out of their way to get to Libya without crossing French territory. And they had to have 3 or 4 extra refuelings at night in radio silence, which is a major task. It all went extraordinarily well, and one of our planes only was lost, and there were a lot of stories about how Gaddafi's children had been killed and all, and up to that time nobody knew that he had any children, and I still don't think that he had any. I think he adopted them shortly after midnight.
One of the questions that was regarding that particular raid was that was probably the first policy change since, because you just come in after the Carter regimen, and this was what people called surgical retaliation.
Yes, and it was. Bombs were very accurate, and we were able to hit all of the targets and destroy a great many of them. I think only one, because of a defect in the fusing, one fell short and hit a French government building in Tripoli. That was not intended. That was
one of the things that happened, of course, after the Reagan Revolution and your tenure in the Defense Department. I'm going to go back to that just quickly, but that one of the faults of the fact of our incursion into Panama was the fact that they didn't use the concept of Reagan and, of course, Cap Weinberger and that surgical retaliation against Noriega. What did you think of that?
Well, I think that we did eventually get him, and we put him in jail, and that's where I thought Saddam Hussein should have been at the end of the Gulf War.
Understood, but what they said was that we really didn't have to send all those troops down to Panama, that we could have gotten him with a cruise missile, as you might have well done.
See. No, I think that, first of all, Congress has made any individual attack on an assassination attempt completely forbidden and illegal. And the other thing was that we were most anxious to destroy some of the facilities that he used in training these terrorists in Libya.
One of the things also that happened during the Reagan administration, we'd like to revisit quickly, is the fact that Reagan administration was accused of overspending on defense for many years. And but oddly enough, you got the reputation as being known as Cap the Knife, and because of the fact that your attitude toward the defense budget. Could you explain that to us?
Well, Cap the Knife came from the activities in California, where our mission and our task was to cut expenditures because we had to balance the budget under the California Constitution. As you know, we have to, and so we had to make very drastic cuts in expenditures to balance the budget. President Reagan even had to increased taxes for a very short time. And when we did balance it, why then we stopped the tax increase and gave the money back.
It sounds like Governor Davis could use your help right now.
Yeah, well, he needs a lot of advice. I know for me, but he needs a lot. But we've in Washington, we had to get the defense forces back in shape again after many years of neglect, and we're coming off now a period of 8 years of Clinton neglect, which has weakened the military and required very strong action. President Bush has had the courage to ask for some $16 billion increase in the budget to try to make up for all these losses, and that's what's happening now.
Larry.
Secretary Weinberger, it's an honor to be speaking to you this morning.
Thank you.
Earlier today, and I think you've mentioned it twice, we've talked about President Bush, and you just mentioned something about the preemptive position that he might be forced to take.
Yes.
Israel withstood Scud attacks during the Gulf War. And my question is, do we have assurance that they are willing to be passive again so as not to turn their Arab nations against our initiatives should we get support from their neighbors?
I don't know, of course, what the basic diplomacy is at the moment. I know that we succeeded in persuading the Israelis in the first Gulf War not to respond, even though they were the subject of attack by the Iraqi missiles at that time. I think that President Sharon, Prime Minister Sharon, has said that they would retaliate if they were attacked this time. And I think that the basic idea would be that they do need to defend themselves, and that they did not improve the situation by not attacking, not responding last time. On the other hand, that war was over so quickly, in less than 100 hours, that it did not become a major issue. I think that if there were prolonged attacks on Israel, there's no question that they would respond, and should.
Another question for you, excuse me, Iran. Is Iran a clear and present danger to American security in the Middle East?
Iran?
Yes, sir.
Yes, well, I think Iran has some people in office who were elected by people in comparatively open elections who are basically far more friendly to America. The leadership, however, remains with the very fanatical Ayatollah who are committed to a strong anti-Western policy. I don't think they're as much of a threat as Iraq is, because I don't think they have the wherewithal or the intention of trying to destroy us. The Iraqi government under Saddam Hussein is avidly seeking revenge for their humiliating defeat, and I think they do present a major danger.
Let me ask you, sure, one second, Ron. Let me just throw one more question. Okay. As we seek support on Saddam, is there a democratic regime that might assume power in the event and when we get him out?
But I think that's one of the things that they're trying their best to do. We've been having meetings with a number of the dissident groups outside of Iraq, and they're split among themselves, and we're trying to unify them. And I think that it's going to take some time, but that's what will ultimately have to happen. It will have to be a government led by their own people who believe in democracy and human rights, and that's what we're going to try our best to obtain. And if we do, it will be infinitely better for everybody than what we have now.
Let me ask this question for you about the so-called domino effect that may occur should we go into Iraq at this particular time, make a regime change. What's to stop the thought that we may have to do that in many other Arab countries as well?
Well, I don't think we will. I don't think they would necessarily Arab countries. I don't think the problems in Iraq stem from any religious problems. I think they stem from the fact that they have the most brutal and repressive dictator who has already invaded and tried to steal two of his neighbors, and who is developing these nuclear weapons. That's what President Bush means when he says time's not on our side, because the longer you give him, the more time he has, the more likely he is gaining possession of nuclear weapons. And it would be an infinitely more difficult job to claw those out of this country. And I think that we have to recognize that the longer we give him, or the more delays we build into the process, the more we're helping him.
One of the questions that's complex is the fact that we're talking about, Secretary Rumsfeld at this time and his duties, and we're also talking about the homeland security prospect of that. And since you stood in as Secretary of Defense and had to sit in his shoes for some time, what participation do you think that Secretary Rumsfeld should be doing now in regard to Homeland Security and that whole mess that's being created?
I think he's doing very well. I think he's doing what has to be done. The President's been trying to get a Homeland Security Department to coordinate all of the internal security measures that are being taken by a number of different departments. Democratic.
Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes, the Democratic Congress is, however, blocking it because they're insisting on labor union rights for all of the employees of the new department. And this would involve the right to strike, and you can't have a Department of Homeland Security on strike and doing very, very much good.
Larry.
So, Secretary, what are your opinions on the Cox report?
Cox report is a very, very fine report. I signed the forward to it. And I believe that Chris Cox is one of our best congressmen, and that he's pointed the finger at some very real threat.
I have another question for you. Thank you for that. What are your thoughts about Jonathan Pollard?
No, I don't know anything more about Jonathan Pollard needs to be said. The court ordered me to provide a classified document as to the damage that he had done. He did enormous damage to our security. I supplied that. It's still classified. And while a lot of people talk about it, I don't talk about classified matters.
As the geopolitical landscape has changed since the Reagan years with the fall of the Berlin Wall and now us in this so-called one world government, many of our products for our defense, namely airplanes and basic factors, are being produced and manufactured overseas. If you were the Secretary of Defense today, what security measures would be taken to ensure that we had a constant flow of supplies, even though they're being produced out of our country?
Yes, I think it's obviously we want to produce them here to the very greatest extent we could. But sometimes the volume gets too great, and sometimes much of your expert labor is overseas. The important thing is that we have a constant, steady flow, as you said, of these new weapons, these very sophisticated, effective weapons, and that we get them to the places where they're most needed. And that's one of the things that's going to take some time to assemble a force to go into Iraq. We don't have the air and sea lift that we had at the beginning of the Gulf War, for example.
One of the last questions we'll ask you is very important about what you were doing on 9/11 and your initial response as one of our foremost policymakers in our country.
Well, I was horrified along there. The first thing I didn't believe, I thought it was just a pilot an error. I was in my office in Washington at the time, and you couldn't really believe that this was happening. There was a direct attack on the United States. The second one then made it all too painfully clear that was the case. And when the Pentagon was hit, it felt to me like almost a personal wound because I lived there in that whole region so long that I couldn't believe that they would do that. But the plane that hit the Pentagon was flying so low it sheared off telephone wires going into the Pentagon. And complete suicide attack. And while we had experienced some of that in World War II, I don't think anybody really believed that it could happen again. And I knew that it had to be responded to very quickly. And I think that President Bush deserves enormous credit for the way in which he brought the nation back and inspired the nation after that terrible day.
What's your last thoughts about corrective action in the future, about terrorism in general, and about what we're facing?
I think we have to improve our human intelligence capability. We have to improve our ability to get people trained and willing to risk their lives as the troops are in trying to get into membership in these organizations. And let us know what's happening, let us know what they're thinking, what they're planning. If we're ready for that, if we have that intelligence, we can do a great deal more to combat it. But in the absence of that, we're kind of flying blind. And it's vital to restore that human intelligence capability as quickly as we can.
Mr. Secretary, one last question for you. And we had another tragedy that you may recall, I'm sure you do. Did we make the right decision to depart from Lebanon after the attack on our barracks?
Oh, I think so. I think we should have departed before. I was begging the president to take the troops out. They couldn't do anything where they were. They were in the middle of the Beirut airport. It was exactly like deploying them in a bullseye in the middle of a very large target. And they didn't have the authority to take and hold the high ground around them or on their flanks. They weren't adequately armed. And it was a course that I had very strongly counseled against. And finally, after that terrible tragedy, which was sadly completely predictable, we did get administration policy to pull them out. But a lot of people said Marines don't cut and run and all that. And I said, yes, but this is not anything they can ever win, and we aren't allowing them to defend themselves. And that made the tragedy inevitable.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.